All right. So we are in part 3 of our series on Hebrews. This is going to be a significantly shorter lesson than the previous two. So we did 3 songs to kind of make up for some time. But some of you guys are probably like, yes, it's going to be shorter. Because the past few have been a little bit long. But to me, the section of text that we're going to be going through is really important, but it's also really straightforward. So this is in Hebrews chapter 2, verses 5 through 18. And the title of what we're talking about and the title of this text is The Founder of Salvation. So starting in verse 5, it says, "For it was not to angels that God subjected the world to come, of which we're speaking. It's been testified somewhere. What is man that you are mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? You made him for a little while lower than the angels. You've crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subjection under his feet. Now in putting everything in subjection to him, he left nothing outside of his control. At present we do not see everything in subjection to him, but we see for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. That is why he's not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through the fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. Therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become merciful and faithful, a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted." All right, so that's the text for the night, right? The founder of salvation. We kind of want to obviously start at the beginning, but something you need to understand is that verse 9 is going to be really, really important for everything that we're talking about here, because it kind of gives us a good explanation of what the previous verses are talking about. It says, "But we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone." And that gives us the correct lens for these first few verses. "For it was not to angels that God subjected the whole world to come, of which we're speaking. It's been testified somewhere, what is man that you're mindful of him, or the son of man that you care for him? You made him for a little while lower than the angels, and you've crowned him with glory and honor, putting everything in subject to his under his feet." So that kind of gives us the proper lens here, right? That for a little while Christ was made lower than the angels. And in verse 7 it teaches us that man is lower than the angels. But since we have a proper understanding from verse 9, we can see that Christ was only for a little while lower than the angels. All right, he was not permanently made lower than the angels. It was a temporary thing, essentially showing us that he was made low for a reason, and then he would return to form, essentially, return to who he is. When we go to verse 14, it says that angels are sent to serve those who will inherit salvation, which is us, right? But then 2 Peter 2 verse 11 teaches us that angels are spoken of as more powerful than humans. So when we're taking this stuff into context, if they are more powerful than us, then why are we greater than them, right? But we are. It's because we are made in the image of God, and angels are not made in the image of God. God sent Christ to die on our behalf. He didn't die on the behalf of angels. He didn't come to save them. He came to save us specifically, right? He loves us specifically. So you're probably thinking, whoa, like that's great info, but what is all this pointing to, and what does it mean for us? It means something really important. The God of the universe took on a truly inferior form, the form of man, while still being fully God, and lived a perfect life on our behalf. It was not a 50-50 split where Jesus was half God and half man. He was 100% God and he was 100% man, simultaneously existing at the same time in one being, which is like what, but it's true. That's how he accomplished what he set out to accomplish. What it means for us is that the perfect sacrifice has been made for us. Our sin has been atoned for. Christ truly humbled himself and came to offer us salvation. And the coolest thing is he's not only offering it, but he made it. Right? He's offering us what he created. He created salvation on our behalf to save us from sin. And he is offering that thing that he created to us. So why would he do that? He made it so that he could save us. Because he loves us more than we can imagine. We'll get into more of that in a few minutes. Verses 6 through 8 show us that God created humanity to have lordship over all things. And what that means is that we have a thing called dominion over creation, which means that we are superior to all of creation. We're the apple of his eye, made in his image, the only thing to ever be done in that light. And we were created to reign with him forever. And that's actually what we were doing when you read in Genesis in the beginning. We were reigning with God forever. He had created us a place where we could dwell in his presence, enjoy all that he is and all that he has to offer. So we were reigning with him in that moment. And then we fell into sin and lost everything. The moment that we chose the world over God was the moment that we lost absolutely everything that we could have inherited from him. We went from perfection to complete and total imperfection. We went from walking with God to complete and total rebellion against God, because the moment sin entered the world, there was a divide placed between us and him. All right. I know that's like kind of a big idea, but we need to understand what this big truth is showing us. It's this: with him we obtain all things, but without him we lose all things. All right, with him we obtain all things. He will give you everything, not in this life, but when you are with him, you will have everything. I'm not talking like cars and all this other stuff. The presence of God is everything. Being with him is everything. A relationship with him is everything. So when we get to exist with him in his presence for eternity, we are being given more than we could ever imagine. And without him, we get none of that. Everything that you ever inherit here is completely temporary and will get you nothing in eternity. All right, the amount of money in your savings account, the amount of things that you can buy, the amount of girls that you hook up with, the amount of whatever, your accolades in sports, athletics, competitions, band, academics, whatever. You can stack those things up as high as you want to, but at the end of the day, all of your accomplishments do not amount to an ounce of God's goodness and an ounce of what he has accomplished. All right, it's essentially like putting a mountain in comparison to a molehill. There's absolutely no comparison whatsoever between the things that you've done and the things that he's done. So those things that you think are so important that you are holding on to and that you are valuing as important in your life, those things mean absolutely nothing at the end of the day. Whenever your time has come and you stand before the King, God does not care about the things that you have stacked up in your life. He cares about if you were in a loving, growing relationship with him. And that's the key to everlasting life, is trusting in Christ as your personal Lord and Savior. Christ became one with man, sharing in temptations, sufferings, and even death, that he may enable us to become one with him, share with him his nature and his rule. And because of this, Christ has been crowned with glory and honor forever. All right? Mankind has the assurance that Christ is gracious, kind, and understanding, and he will help those who love him to become one with him and thus qualify for this glorious inheritance that we've been talking about. That's from verses 17 and 18 that we were going through. So now that we kind of have the proper perimeter of this lesson, the thing that we're talking about, we need to answer what I would consider some important questions. So we've got 3 important questions that we're really going to go through. We'll be done in probably the next 10 minutes. This isn't very long. First question, well, I'll just name them all to you. What is salvation and why is it a thing? Now, there's some of you that when I ask these questions, you're going to be like, this is very elementary. Don't overlook elementary, because elementary saves you. And elementary does not get old. This is important stuff, and it's stuff that you can easily overlook. And I honestly think that it is significantly less elementary than you think. What is salvation and why is it a thing? Why is Christ the only one who can cancel out my sin debt, make a way for me, and save me? And why is it so significant that Christ came for me? All right, so those are the three big things that we really want to answer. So what is salvation and why is it a thing? It is deliverance from sin and its consequences. That is literally what salvation means. And for the Christian, it's deliverance from sin and its consequences only by faith in Christ. And that is the only true salvation. There are other salvations that are preached in this world that say if you do these certain things and climb up this certain ladder and make yourself look good enough and be good enough and earn your way into these things, then you can be with this God or this God. And none of those things are accurate. The only true salvation is offered from Jesus Christ, where he came to us, became like us, walked a path that we could not walk. We're going to get into that in a second. And he offers us an opportunity to put our faith and our hope and our trust in him. That's true salvation. And it's a thing because from the beginning, we ran away from God, chose the world over him, and lived in rebellion, right? It's also a thing because we are a people who desperately need saving. All right, we are more lost than we can ever physically imagine. You have literally no idea how lost you are when you don't know God until he seeks you out and you find him. Essentially, when you come to know him, you begin to realize how lost you truly were. We're lost, we're hopeless, and he knows what is in store for us without him. God gave himself so that we could have him. And if you just take that statement in and of itself, think about how much of a selfless, ridiculous, beautiful, amazing thing that is. That the God of the universe, who is infinite and needs absolutely nothing. He already has anything and everything he could ever want because of who he is. He gave himself so that he could have you. That's like when I think about myself and the things that I've done and the ways that I've fallen short and failed him and ran away from him. The fact that in his perfection, he chose to look at me and say, I want you, is a mind-blowing thing to me. It makes no sense. But that's grace. That's the beauty of it. That the God of the universe would look at me, someone who has no business even being in his presence, and say, I love you and I want you to be with me. And that's why he came for us. He illustrated that to us by literally sending his son for us. His desire from the beginning was for us to be with him. Eden, that we talked about earlier, literally the beginning, is essentially that is his desire, right? For us to enjoy him forever. But what we did was choose the world instead. Christ is the only one who could cancel out our debt because there was a balance that had to be paid for our sin. All right, we were in a sin debt that we could never pay back. There were no amount of sacrifices and offerings that could stack up to pay the debt that was made by us, because the thing about our debt is it's not a finite debt. There's not like a cap to the amount of debt that you accrue as a sinner. It's that your debt continues to grow every day because you continue to sin every day. So it's not like you're just in this little bit of debt. You have an ever-growing debt. You sin every single day, multiple times a day. Like if your sinning was tied to withdrawals from an ATM, you'd run out of money in 2 hours because of how sinful your nature is. Imagine being in way over your head with debt to the bank, and before you can even think about gathering enough funding to pay it off, it's already gone up times 1,000. All right, that's essentially the reality of the life that we live in. We are debtors, and our debt is ever growing. And in your debt, you can't possibly pay it off because it is still coming for you. Imperfection cannot fill imperfection. It's impossible, right? An imperfect thing cannot fill imperfection. But the one thing that can is perfection. And that's why the perfect Son of God was the only one who could cancel out our sin debt, because his perfection completely blots out our imperfection. It makes it as if it never even happened. Christ is the only one who can make a way for us because he's the only one who can walk the path that leads to everlasting life. He's the only spotless sacrifice that can be made. A good man is not enough A fattened calf isn't good enough. A decent life does not cut it. It has to be blood for blood. That's directly out of the Old Testament. You're like, that sounds super morbid, but that's why sacrifices were made. It was a blood offering, essentially trading blood for blood in that moment, saying like, we offer this so that you will forgive us and spare us from this thing. But the only thing that can cancel out eternal imperfection is eternal perfection. All right, a growing stack of imperfections cannot cancel out imperfection, but eternal perfection can completely cancel out eternal imperfection. And only Christ offers that. The bottom line is this, a super simple statement, and you're probably going to be like, wow, that's deep, right? But it is when you really think about it. You can't save yourself. You can't. There's nothing that you can do to save yourself. Let that statement really sink into your brain. And realize how helpless you really are. There's nothing you can do to save yourself, no matter how hard you try, how good you do, how moral you are, how much success you bring, how much you keep the law, how much you study and read the word. You cannot save yourself. There's nothing you can do to earn God's approval and bring salvation upon your life in your own power. Only Jesus can do that. Only Jesus can do that. Only Jesus can save you. Only accepting Him can save you. It is so significant that Christ came because He truly is the only one who can offer us hope. The only one who can save us. Because He can fully identify with everything that we have ever been through. He lived the same life that you are living, but perfectly. He was tempted, tested, and ridiculed. And since He was tempted and suffered, He can help us that are going through it also. Jesus is not some far off God that's not listening, nor is He incapable of understanding your problems, your imperfections, and the things that you struggle with. He walked through every single bit of it. The only difference in you and Him is that He's 100% God and 100% man. And He walked the road that you're trying to walk perfectly. While you stumbled all over the place and had to lean into Him and have Him essentially drag you to the finish line. Right? Most beautiful thing about Him, He's lived it, He's experienced it, He hears you, He loves you. Right? He knows your imperfections, He knows the ways that you stumbled, He knows the ways that you've fallen short, He knows the ways that you are not good enough, and He looks at you and says, I love you anyway, I want you to be in a relationship with me, I want you to have me as Lord over your life, so that when that day comes, when you're done serving me on this rock that's floating through outer space, you're going to stand before my Father, and instead of seeing your sin and your imperfection, He's going to see me standing on your behalf, and He's going to look at you and say, well done, good and faithful servant, welcome home. Not because of anything that you did, accomplished, or stacked up in your life, but because of everything that Christ did for you on your behalf. So when like Jeff and people like that say it's not about us, it's about Jesus, it truly is not about you at all. This entire following Christ process is all about Him. We just need to trust it, believe it, and rest in it. And we need to rest that He's good. Man, so that's pretty much the end of what we're going to be talking about. But one thing, this isn't in my notes, but it's something I really feel like I just kind of led randomly at the end of this to share with you. You're not you going to the Lord for forgiveness or going to the Lord with issues in your life, temptations and struggles and different things like that. Those aren't things that you need to lay before Him with a guilt-ridden heart. The Lord takes joy in forgiving you. He loves to forgive you. That sounds like such a ridiculous thing to think about. But when we bring these things to Him and lay them at His feet, He doesn't look at you. It's not as if He's looking at you saying, you're so stupid, I can't believe you did that again. You're not good enough, don't come back into my presence. I can't believe you continue to do the same things over and over and over and over again and get away from me. Right? It's actually the exact opposite. He looks at you with open arms and a loving heart and says, I'm so happy you brought this to me. I forgive you. I love you. Now lean into me so that you don't have to be that anymore. Right? The coolest thing about God's grace is that it's so big that you can abuse it, but you're not supposed to. Right? If you have an accurate picture of who God is, then you're not going to abuse His grace. You're going to lean into it and be thankful for it because you have a God that doesn't want to get way ahead of you and look back and laugh at you when you trip and fall down in life. He wants to run with you so that when you stumble, He can pick you back up. Right? It's a beautiful, amazing thing about him. He takes joy in loving you. He takes joy in forgiving you. And he takes joy in you doing life with him. All right? That is incredible. So, just to wrap up this lesson, that God is the founder of salvation. It is a beautiful thing that the founder of salvation, the founder of us being able to receive just a saving presence from him, for him to love us and for us to be able to walk in him. It's incredible that he loves us the way that he does, because we don't deserve it a bit. There's nothing that we do to deserve God's love. So,